Yesterday I got a question about command line arguments and how we get them into our scripts. And as I thought that there are probably more of you who have this question, so I was thinking I could record this little example or this video. And as you can see, I have created an example script, and we will get back to that in a second. But first, let's start in another end. Because if we want to start an application or if we want to start a program in our computer, we usually just click an icon. So for example, if I want to start my web browser, I would click Safari here. And if I want to browse my files on my computer, I use a file browser. And we can see here the files I happen to have in this directory here are the same as I have on my desktop. So in my file browser, if I double click a file, I'll open it. And from the file browser, we can also start applications by double clicking them. But this is normally how we today use our computers. But there is another way of doing it, and that is to use the command line. And on a Mac it's called terminal, and on a Mac it's called the command prompt or CMD. And while we're here in the terminal, we can navigate to different directories. So I can navigate to the same directory as is shown here, also the one that I have here on my desktop. But I do that by using the cd command for change directory. And now I have navigated so that in the terminal I am in the same directory as the one that we see here. And I can navigate the other way too. So I could do change directory, a space, and dot dot. That means that I go up one directory in the tree. That would be the same as going to the directory where we have the desktop. But I want to go back to that directory, so this is how I do it here in my file browser. I just double click it. But here in my terminal, I have to write the command to go back to the desktop folder or the desktop directory. And we don't have to have the file browser open. So to use the terminal, I just had it open to show you what it meant. And there are many other commands that you can use in the command line. But for now, I will stop here and just say that the cd command is the one that we use to change directory. But alright, what if we want to start our script? So now I am in the directory where I have my script, and my script is called main.py. It's also the same as we see here in the background. If I want to start it, I use the Python command and then I specify the name of my script. And then if I run it, we see that it gives me some information here that if I want to use my script, I have to supply a file name. And we will look at the code in a second. But all right, if I do that, if I supply a file name or a path to a file, we'll see what happens. And I will supply the name to this file here on my desktop, names.txt. So I write the path, the full path to my names.txt file. And then if I run my script, we can see that it gives a different output. This time we did supply a file name as it asked us to do. And then we can see it prints its first and second argument and then the content of the file. So the content of the file is some names. But all right. So this is how you start a script from the command line, and you can supply an argument. In this case, it's a path to a file. And if we look at the script here in the background, I have added some comments And you will have access to the script in the post too, but let's quickly go over it together. So we import the module sys so that we will be able to access those arguments that we send along to the script when we start it. And it's good practice to try to avoid writing code outside of functions. So what I have done here is that I have added a main function, and then I've also made sure by using this if statement down here that if we start this script from the command line like we did down here, we will make sure to call that function that I call main. And if we look at the code in the main function, the first thing that I do here is that I check, all right, how many arguments did we get? And if we did not get 2, we write this message that we saw somewhere in here. We saw it here that all right, if I didn't supply this path to my file, it printed this message instead. But you can ask yourself, why is it 2? Because we only supplied 1 argument. We supplied our path to the file down here. Well, it works like this. The first argument at index 0 is always the name of the script. And the first argument that we supply is always at index 1. So if we want to supply 1 argument, we must take this into account and say that the length of the arguments will be 2. That means that we supply 1 and the automatic one, which is the name of the script, will also be there. And I print them both here. We can see them down here in the output too. So we can see that the first one is the name of our script, and the second one is the first one that we supplied. And after that, we use this second argument that we stored into a variable called file name. We use that to open a file and print all the lines. So one thing to point out here is that when we open the file, we supply the file name or the path to the file. And in this case, we got it from the command line argument that we stored into a variable called file name. And I like to do it in several steps. We could have written sysargv1 down here instead, but if we do it in several steps, it's a little bit easier to read the code and see what we are doing. Hopefully this has given a little bit of insight on how we actually get those arguments into our script. And as I said, I recommend you store them into variables and then you use the variables in the script. It becomes a little bit easier to read the code.